It is the night of November 26, 1910. A dense fog hangs over the Hudson River. At the railway station in Hoboken, New Jersey, a group of men is boarding a private train car. They are dressed in hunting gear, carrying shotguns and canvas bags. To the casual observer, they look like a group of wealthy friends heading south for a duck hunting trip. But if you looked closer, you might have recognized them. And if you recognized them, you would have been terrified. These were not friends. They were rivals. They were the competitors who ran the financial empires of the Western world. One was a representative of the Rockefellers. One was a representative of J.P. Morgan. One was a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe. Together, the men sitting in that train car controlled approximately 1/4 of the entire wealth of the world. They had been ordered to come here under the strictest secrecy. They were told to use only their first names. They were told not to dine together in the public station. They were told that if the press found out they were meeting, the plan would fail instantly. Why all the cloak and dagger? Because they weren't going hunting. They were going to draft a piece of legislation. This train was headed for a remote, private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island, and by the time they returned to New York 9 days later, they would have the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System. They didn't call it that yet. They called it the Aldrich Plan. But the result was the same. We are taught in school that the Federal Reserve was created by the government to stabilize the economy and protect the little guy. We are told it is a check and balance on the greed of Wall Street. This is the greatest fairy tale ever sold to the American public. The Federal Reserve was not created to control the bankers. It was created by the bankers for the bankers to control you. What happened on Jekyll Island was not a government meeting. It was a heist. It was the moment when the control of the American currency was stolen from the people and handed over to a private cartel. And the most terrifying part, they got away with it. For over 100 years you have been living in the crime scene, paying the price for what happened during those 9 days in 1910. Today, we are going to open the doors of the Jekyll Island Club and expose exactly how they did it. To understand why these men needed to meet in secret, you have to understand the America of 1910. The public hated Wall Street. They hated the money trust. The average American understood that the game was rigged. There was a populist movement sweeping the country, demanding that the government break up the big banks. The men on that train, Nelson Aldrich, Frank Vanderlip, Paul Warburg, they knew they were sitting on a powder keg. The banking system at the time had a problem. The problem was competition. In a free market, if a bank makes bad bets, it goes bust. If it lends money to people who can't pay it back, it fails. The depositors lose money, yes, but the banker loses his empire. This is healthy. It cleans out the rot. But the big bankers, Morgan, Rockefeller, Warburg, they didn't want a free market. They wanted a guaranteed market. They wanted a system where they could keep their profits, but transfer their losses to the taxpayer. They wanted a lender of last resort. They had just seen a preview of this in the panic of 1907. The market crashed. Banks collapsed. People panicked. J.P. Morgan stepped in and personally bailed out the system, acting like a one-man central bank. But Morgan was getting old. He knew he couldn't do it forever. And more importantly, the public was suspicious of one man having that much power. They needed a system that looked like a government agency but acted like J.P. Morgan. So, the invite went out. The destination, the Jekyll Island Club. This was the most exclusive club in the world. It was said that 1/6 of the world's wealth could be found at the dinner tables of the Jekyll Island Club. It was the perfect place to hide. Let's look at the lineup of the conspirators. First, Nelson Aldrich. He was a senator, but he wasn't really a public servant. He was John D. Rockefeller's father-in-law. He was the political muscle. Then there was Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank of New York, which represents the Rockefellers. Then Henry Davison, senior partner of J.P. Morgan Company, and most importantly, the brain behind the operation, Paul Warburg. Paul Warburg is the key. He was a German banker, a partner in Kuhn, Loeb & Co., and a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe. He came to America with a specific mission: to install the European model of central banking in the United States. He was the architect. The others were just the muscle. For 9 days, these men sat in the clubroom, smoking cigars and arguing over the details. Warburg lectured them. He told them that they couldn't call it a central bank. The American people hated that word. It sounded too European. It sounded like a monarchy. So, Warburg said, we won't call it a bank. We will call it a Federal Reserve System. Let's break down that name. Federal. It implies it is part of the government. It is not. It is as federal as Federal Express. It is a private corporation owned by its member banks. Reserve. It implies they keep money in a vault to back up your deposits. They do not. The system is based on fractional reserve banking, meaning they lend out money they don't have. System. It implies a decentralized network of regional hubs. This was the genius part. They created 12 regional banks in New York, San Francisco, Dallas, etc. to make it look like the power was spread out across the country. In reality, the New York branch ran everything. The name was a masterpiece of camouflage. The plan they drafted on Jekyll Island had one primary goal: to create a cartel. In any other industry, if competitors meet in secret to fix prices and control supply, it is a felony. It is called racketeering. But because they were bankers, and because they got a senator to sponsor the bill, it became the law of the land. But drafting the plan was the easy part. Selling it to Congress and the American people, that was the hard part. The deception they used to pass this bill is one of the greatest psychological operations in political history. When Senator Aldrich returned to Washington and introduced the bill, the public was suspicious. They knew Aldrich was a Rockefeller man, so the bankers pulled a false flag operation. They instructed their own banker friends to go out in public and attack the bill. They had prominent bankers give speeches saying, "This Aldrich plan is terrible for banking. It gives the government too much control." The public looked at this and thought, well, if the greedy bankers hate it, it must be good for us. They fell for it hook, line, and sinker. The bankers were publicly trashing the very bill they had secretly written. It was 4D chess, and the American public was playing checkers. But the Aldrich plan initially failed to pass. It was too obviously a banker's bill. They needed a new political vehicle. They needed a Democrat. Enter Woodrow Wilson. The bankers threw their financial weight behind Wilson in the 1912 election. In exchange, Wilson promised to sign their bill. They renamed the Aldrich plan to the Glass-Owen bill, tweaked a few details and presented it again. Same contents, different packaging. And then they waited for the perfect moment to vote. They waited until December 1913. Congress was tired. Everyone wanted to go home for Christmas. Many senators had already left Washington. On December 23, 1913, 2 days before Christmas, while most of the opposition was gone, they brought the bill to a vote. It passed. Woodrow Wilson signed it into law hours later. The heist was complete. The creature from Jekyll Island had been born. So, what did this creature actually do? Why should you, living in the 21st century, care about a meeting in 1910? Because the Federal Reserve changed the fundamental nature of money. Before 1913, money was an asset. It was gold or silver, or a certificate that could be exchanged for gold or silver. It was something you owned. After 1913, money became debt. It became something you owed. The Federal Reserve has a mandrake mechanism, a magical way of creating money out of thin air. When the U.S. government needs money, it doesn't just print it. That would be too obvious. Instead, the government issues treasury bonds, IOUs. The Federal Reserve then writes a check to buy those bonds. But here is the catch. The Federal Reserve doesn't have any money in its account. When it writes that check, the money is created at that exact moment. The government takes this newly created money and spends it. But the bond, the debt, still exists. And who has to pay the interest on that bond? You do, through your taxes. Every dollar in circulation today is essentially a check written against the future labor of the American taxpayer. We are not just using currency. We are trading shares of our own future enslavement. But the theft goes deeper. The stated goal of the Federal Reserve is to maintain price stability. Let's look at their report card. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the US dollar has lost over 97% of its purchasing power. Think about that. A system created to stabilize. The currency has presided over the near total destruction of that currency. If you hired a security guard to protect your house, and over the course of his shift, 97% of your furniture was stolen, would you keep paying him? Would you call him a success? This inflation is not an accident. It is a feature. It is a hidden tax. When the Fed prints money to bail out a bank or fund a war, they are diluting the value of the dollars in your pocket. They are stealing your purchasing power without ever sending you a tax bill. It is the perfect crime because the victim doesn't even know he is bleeding until he is already dead. The men on the train to Jekyll Island knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't trying to fix the economy. They were trying to secure their own power, and they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Today, the system they built is reaching its mathematical limit. We are seeing the cracks. The debt is exponential. The inflation is structural. The lender of last resort has become the lender of only resort. The train ride to Jekyll Island was the beginning of the American empire's financial dominance. But every empire that is built on debt eventually collapses under the weight of that debt. The heist of 1910 bought the bankers a century of unlimited power. But the bill is finally coming due. We are living in the final chapters of the Jekyll Island experiment. The volatility you see in the markets, the rising cost of living, the widening gap between the rich and the poor, these are not random events. They are the direct consequences of the decision to hand the keys of the economy to a private cartel. The next time you look at a dollar bill, don't look at the face of Washington. Look at the seal of the Federal Reserve, and remember the fog, the duck hunting gear, and the secret train car. Remember that the money in your pocket is not yours. It is theirs. We are just using it. So how do we escape? If the system is rigged, if the money is broken, where do we go? The answer lies in opting out. It lies in understanding what money was before 1913 and what it could be again. But to understand the future of money, you first have to understand the death of the old money. Specifically, the death of the gold standard. Why did they take our gold, and how did they convince the world that paper was better than metal? That is the story for another day. But for now, wake up. The heist didn't happen in a movie. It happened in New Jersey, and they are still robbing you every single day.